want to thank everybody for attending this evening for TechScan's webinar, T-Scan Digital Bite Force Dynamics. My name is Jennifer Cullen, and I am the East Coast Sales Representative for TechScan, and welcome. Our agenda for the evening is a 30-minute webinar format. What we're going to discuss is, really what T-Scan is, why are our doctors using it, and then we're going to spend a good amount of our time going through case examples, because I think that's the most important. Instead of doing, because of the large amount of attendees, instead of doing a direct question and answer section at the end, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you guys to write down my email address, and as you're going along, as questions come up, write them down, and at the end of the webinar, just press send, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. If I don't know the answer, I will certainly try to find somebody that does. So the goal of tonight is really for you guys to gain an understanding of how T-Scan can aid in the diagnosis and the treatment of your patients. Traditionally, T-Scan was always thought of as a case finishing tool, and we have a lot of our doctors nowadays really using T-Scan on the front end to help in diagnosis and patient education. And so we're going to go through all of this stuff. So what is T-Scan? You can see it here in the screen if you haven't seen it in person before. It's a diagnostic device that records your patient's bite force dynamics. So it looks at occlusal force, timing, and location. The sensor that the patient actually bites down on was actually developed at MIT in Boston and Tufts right here in Boston. If you're interested in learning more about the sensor technology, I highly recommend that you check out our website at techscan.com. The sensors, although they were originally used for dentistry and developed for dentistry, they actually are used in thousands of different applications across the world. So it's really interesting to check out where else people are using these sensors. So how it works is the patient bites down on the sensor here, and what we're going to get is a readout on the computer screen. And we're going to be able to see the force and timing data. So what can T-Scan do for you? What it does on the front end is it enhances your patient communication. There seems to be a divide between what you see as signs of occlusal instability in your patients and then the patient relating either the signs that you see or their symptoms back to their bite. T-Scan helps that divide and really allows the patient to own their own problems. And what our doctors have told us is that that helps them increase their case acceptance. So it's also going to provide you with valuable force and timing data in other parts of your practice as well. And the fourth thing that's listed here is the ability to be able to fine-tune to a higher level. Take, for example, splint therapy. If you do a splint on a patient and you are able to fine-tune it to a higher level with T-Scan, the patient's going to be more comfortable faster, and you're going to be able to decrease the amount of follow-up appointments that you have normally scheduled for that patient. And so some of our traditional methods of measuring occlusion in our practice is articulating paper, paste, wax, foil, shim stock a lot of times is used on implants, and ribbon. And so what I've noticed is over the last 4 or 5 years, really, there's been a significant change in dentistry and in T-Scan as well. And I think that that comes from a couple different reasons. I think that there is just an overwhelming amount of technology out there that dentists are using. I think that there is a need for more information. And I also think that there's been some significant research that's been out there as well. And so let's look at the technology. Now, what are some of the ways that you use technology on a daily basis in your practice? From the moment the patient walks in the door, you have them in a practice management system. You might be taking digital photographs on them. And then from the time they leave, with the billing process, I mean, all of that is done digitally. And so TechScan is an easy fit within that part of your practice as well. The next is research, and I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time going through this, but there are a significant amount of papers that have been done. If you're interested in looking at any of the research that we have, please email me, have that be one of your questions. I can send you over our bibliography. The one paper I'd really like to look at is the one that sticks out the most to me as kind of a game changer. It was done at the University of Alberta and in Canada, and what it was is in an engineering environment, they took epoxy casts and they loaded them at multiple different loads. And then they put articulating paper in those casts, and they took pictures of the articulating paper marks. And what they did is they measured the size of the articulating paper marks in pixels. And so if we look here, we have the area in pixels, so 0 to 1200, and the force in newtons. So the casts were loaded at 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 newtons. And then what they found was huge variances in the data. So if we take, now obviously this isn't from the study, but this would be something you would see in your practice. This particular articulating paper mark, say that that's 300 pixels. Well, that could be 25 newtons, 100 newtons, 250 newtons, 400 newtons. And so what really hit me with this study was that, you know, this is why my doctors are so frustrated with occlusion, because it's not easy. The same as you could take this paper mark and this paper mark and say they were both 300 newtons. One might be 25 pixels and one might be 1,000 pixels. And so there's really, looking at articulating paper marks is frustrating in your practice. So some of the conclusions from this article were that the second one here is higher loads often yielded smaller markings. And why I like that is because it's opposite really of what has been taught traditionally. And so what we see with T-scan is that often a smaller mark is actually more forceful. And it goes back to really, if you think of a woman walking on a floor, a wood floor with high heels, you know, is that going to cause more damage, the high heel, or is a men's loafer going to cause more damage on the wood floor? And then the third thing here is that 21% of the time, similar loads resulted in similar mark size. And so really, one out of the five times, 79% of the time, it didn't result in the same mark size. And so I think that's important. It opened my eyes, and I think it will open yours as well. So what we're looking at is with T-scan. T-scan doesn't replace our traditional means, but what it does is it puts your articulating paper into context. So it tells you when you're looking at all those marks, okay, when did that mark come in and how much force is on that mark? And that's been really helpful in our dental practices that are using T-scan. Let's take a look at this example here. So we have a full upper arch reconstruction, beautiful dentistry that was done. The paper marks look really good. But how do we know when we look at these marks which is the first contact? Did this hit first or did this hit first? And which of these is more forceful? And so that's the information that T-scan is going to tell us. As you can see, this is the T-scan data that's here on the screen, and we're going to go into the software so you'll get to see this. But the right posterior quadrant has over 50% of the load on it, and we don't see that in the picture above. We don't know that, but T-scan tells us that. So let me scoot over to our software here. What we're going to do is I'm going to actually enter myself in as a patient. And I'm going to press New Scan. So this is T-scan 8 for some of you that might have seen an older system. This is the new system that's out. And what you're looking at is on the screen, blue is low force. This is me just pressing on the sensor with my hands. And as I press harder, I generate more colors, pink being the highest amount of force. And so that's what we're looking for every time we take a scan on our patient. Where's their low force and where's their high force? The other thing we're looking at is what's the distribution of forces. And so that red and white diamond that's in the middle, if we had a perfectly balanced bite, it would show up in the middle. If we have more force on the left, it's going to show up over here. If we have more force on the right, it's going to show up over here. And so let me take a scan on myself so you guys can see. Now let's pretend that I'm a new patient that comes into your practice. So I'm going to take a scan where I'm closing and opening and closing and opening, and then I'll take a second one where I'm closing and sliding to the left. Okay, so I recorded that on the screen. And so what we're looking for is through time, we're looking to see how things come together. So you guys can tell me how bad my bite is. And so you see when I come into my bite, it looks pretty well balanced. I've got good contacts coming in on both sides, 55% of force on the left and 44 on the right. But as I come in, there's kind of these spikes that happen on 2 and on 15. And I've got over 31% of force on number 15. And my pressure is more off to the left. And we want this to be right down the middle zone. And so that would be an area that we would look at right away. So let me take a new scan, and I'm going to slide to the left now. Okay, you can see that the scan doesn't take very long at all. And so this is something you would do on your new patient exam to explain to them. Maybe you've seen an abfraction and you want to see if it's related to the force that's on the teeth. So you can see the same recording here. I'm closing. And we're going to see me slide to the left in a second. So I'm moving to the left. Now let's look at how number 2 stays in. So this is the things you're looking for, and I know you guys are doing this in your practice, but I wouldn't like that number 2 hangs in there. And number 15 has 45% of the force on it. If I had an ideal bite, I should be up here. So these are the things that you're going to talk to your patient about. See, I just kind of hang out on 15 for a while. So let's do this now. Let's go back into the presentation. I'm going to go through a couple cases of doctors that are using T-scan so you can see the adjustment process. This is a full upper arch reconstruction patient. And the reason why I like to use this is because whether or not you are doing this type of dentistry or not, it really applies to even if it was a single crown. The patient was adjusted with paper upon delivery, and the patient's bite felt great. I don't know if he just loved his teeth, but he didn't feel anything off. He felt very balanced. What happened is in the 3-month follow-up visit, the patient's bite still feels great, but the doctor notices a contact, an open contact between 2 and 3. And so the doctors that I work with tell me all the time that they see this in their practice. They had a tight contact, and then a little bit of time goes by, and it opens up. So let's go into that. I'll find that case in here. So this is the T-scan software. I've got a bunch of cases in here. Okay, so this is the first scan that we did on this patient. And so I'm going to play it from the very beginning, and we're going to see what happens. So they first come in, and what do we see? The most distally located contact on number 2 comes in early and heavy to everything. Our what we call the center of force trajectory is way off to the right and posterior. We would want it in here. We have 85% of the force on the right early on. And so this is the information that would be really valuable to know before you send your patient off the door, because he winds up contacting on all of his teeth, and the paper marks looked really good. But this is the information that's missing. So let's see. I'm going to go through and show you what we did. So we made some adjustments on number 2 and number 15. I didn't. Obviously, the doctor did. So let's look at 1234. Okay, so I'm going to play through again. So now the patient comes in, and it's looking better, right? We have 35% of force now, not 60-something%, and we're 60-40. So we're getting there. So again, it's the same process. We now go in with paper. We mark it up. We know we're going to number 2 and number 15. And let's see this, 1247 we'll go to. So this whole process was 20 minutes. So now the patient comes into their bite. And where we ended that day was here. So the patient's 55-45, 14% of force on number 2, 20% or 19% on number 3. Could we get it better? Yes. But considering the patient started at 85-15, right to left, we were happy with this result for that day. So hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of how that would work in your practice. So let's take a look at this second patient. So this is a headache, muscle pain patient. There was a variety of different diagnostic tests done, including T-scan. What was decided by the doctor was that he was going to adjust the patient's bite to eliminate some of the posterior interferences that were there. So we'll flip back over to T-scan. Now let's look at the first case here. So this is the patient closing. You're going to see them close and then slide to the left. So they close, and really they're pretty well balanced. Look at this, 50, 49, 50. It looks pretty good. So what we're going to see is when they move to the left, we're going to see what happens. And so this is what we find all the time. That often these marks, these bouncing side interferences on number 2, and what's interesting about this case is that the ability to be able to see the timing in this sequence, because eventually that contact goes away. So if we were to look at our patient's teeth and see that they get canine to canine, we would think, well, they disclude their posterior teeth completely. But what we didn't see, if we weren't using T-scan, was that a fraction of a second before that, there was still 34% of force on number 2. And so when you use it in conjunction with all of the other things that you're using in your practice to look at this stuff, it becomes extremely valuable. So let's take a look at, obviously he made adjustments to that tooth. Let's see what it looks like now. So the patient comes into their bite, and we're going to see them slide off to the left, come right up on the canine, and everything else goes away. So I think that's a good case to see how that might apply in your practice. So the third case we're going to look at is the overload of implants, because T-scan isn't necessarily something that has to be used if you're doing a full equilibration all the time. Even if you just want to do a quick check on your implants to make sure that they're not overloaded, what we can do with T-scan is make sure that the implants load later than everything else and load with less pressure. So let's take a look at this case. Okay, so our implants are labeled here I-2 and I3. So we have an implant on 2 and an implant on 3. And so this is the patient closing and opening. And what we see is this early force on number 2. So that's what you don't want on an implant, is that shear force on an implant. Now the implant may not fail, but maybe you fracture the crown or There's a lot of different things that can go on here. There's 18% of force on this tooth, and our center of force trajectory is moving off to the right. If we have implants here on 2 and 3, think about it. Where would we want our balance? We'd want this center of force trajectory moving off to the left, because we'd rather load this side than this side over here where the implants are to protect them. So it's all about protecting the occlusion. So let's take a look at where that ended. And so now they come into their bite. And everything kind of loads. You can see that everything else is loaded, and the implants have barely come into contact. Our center of force trajectory is moving away from the implants, and the implants are loaded, but not anywhere near the amount of force as the rest of the teeth on the other side. And so that's our goal there. And so what are some of the ways that you can implement T-Scan into your practice? With this, what I really recommend you doing is speaking with your T-Scan rep on a one-on-one level. Everybody has different practice, and we have some doctors that use T-Scan every time they use articulating paper. They use it on all their hygiene patients and all their initial exams. And then we have doctors that only use it for larger cosmetic cases. So I would really highly recommend just speaking with your T-Scan rep and looking into your practice and deciding, what patients are you going to use it on and where it's the best fit. Some of the applications, sometimes people ask me and they think it's only used for one particular type of material. Really, it can be used on dentures, orthodontics, as I mentioned previously, TMD appliances. It's not just occlusal equilibrations. It's really a variety of different things within your practice. And so let's go back to this again, now that you're more informed on what T-Scan is. When we're looking at this, when you guys are in your practice tomorrow, how are we going to make educated decisions as to what to do with this? If we had T-Scan, we would know that this contact back here is this contact, which this tooth has 37% of the force on it. And this contact that's here only has 6% of the force on it. And so it really gives us that valuable information to make better decisions. And so what our doctors tell us, I guess, that T-Scan can do and does for their practices is they tell us it increases their efficiency. I think that's probably the most important there, along with improving their clinical results. And obviously, it will also differentiate your practice. So what we've covered today is we've been able to identify some of the changes in occlusion and in dentistry through technology and research. We've learned how the technology works. We learned to focus on where, when, and how much, and how T-Scan can put your paper marks into context. And we've also, hopefully you've gained an understanding of how T-Scan can really help your patients and your practice. And so some of the next steps for you, I know this is only a half-hour, 30-minute webinar. I really recommend you set up a visit or a call with your T-Scan representative. The numbers, international numbers, are here, 617-464-4500, or the 800 number for domestic folks. And also, if you have my email address that's there, now would be the best time to press send. And any questions that you might have, I can get back to you this evening and hopefully be able to answer anything. We want to thank you very much for attending this evening's webinar, and we hope that you enjoyed your time.